Hello, good morning to everyone. We're here for our fourth appointment today, discussing with Suzanne Spalding and Chris Grove about some of the challenges that the COVID-19 is creating from industry and government perspective, from the cybersecurity side. So as I mentioned, I'm here with Suzanne Spalding. Very honored to have you here today and having the chance to discuss with you about this topic. Suzanne is a senior advisor at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, but also was a former DHS Undersecretary for Cybersecurity and Infrastructure. So welcome, Suzanne, and great to chat with you today. So Chris, of course, great, to have you here. We've been together in the last, 3 appointments. Welcome. Do you want to just give a quick introduction for the people that doesn't know you?
Sure. Hi, I'm Chris Grove, technology evangelist here at Nozomi Networks. And like Andrea mentioned, I've been able to host the last few webinars, and I hope that you guys have enjoyed the content. And this is the one that's going to be the most exciting of them all. I'm very excited about the content today.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Chris. And as Chris mentioned, we have the chance to tackle the technology side. So as you may follow us in the last webinar, we basically launched a community page where now we are collaborating with lots of different professionals in different industry, where we basically collect what we see from a threat intelligence perspective, and we published and we bring all this intelligence available for all the community. We discuss about potential free tools that can be used for monitor and having go more deep in some of the new challenge that the COVID-19 is bringing to us, like remote access and so on. And today we would like to keep going the discussion with Suzanne and Chris and try to take more an angle about what a company can do and what the government and the community can do from the high level perspective for try to improve the situation where we are. And in particular, Suzanne, you are an active member for the U.S. government Cybersecurity Solarium Commission, and recently was published a very, very interesting report with some recommendation there. Do you want to tell us a little bit more and how eventually this report fit with what's happening right now related to the COVID-19?
Sure. Thanks for the opportunity. The Cyberspace Solarium Commission was established by Congress in the National Defense Authorization Act to make recommendations with regard to an overall strategy for improving our posture in cyberspace. And the Solarium name really comes from a room in the White House, a solarium, a sunroom in the White House that President Eisenhower liked to use to hold meetings with his senior advisors and with outside experts. And he had a meeting with his senior national security team in just a few months after Stalin's death. And he said, we have an opportunity here to develop a coherent approach for how we're going to deal with the Soviet Union going forward. And the Solarium is now been studied by historians as a process for developing a strategy. So members of Congress who created this legislation were students of history and decided that was kind of the approach that they thought we needed first for cybersecurity and for our posture in cyberspace. So very briefly, the report recommends an overarching strategy that we call layered deterrence. And I know there's a big debate out there about whether deterrence can work at all in cyberspace, right? And whether adversary actors, bad actors are susceptible to deterrence. The commission came down very firmly on the side of, yes, we think we can alter the cost-benefit analysis of our adversaries. And so we do that, we make 3 broad recommendations around shaping behavior, around imposing costs, but also around denying benefits, right? I think in cyber, there's a frustration with our failure to impose adequately sufficient costs on the adversary, but we also do need to focus on the other side of that cost-benefit analysis on denying benefits. So we've got over 80 recommendations around 6 different pillars. And I'm happy to, kind of list those pillars and walk through some of the recommendations, but let me stop there and invite your questions.
Yeah, I think that is that is a great things. And one of the things that I noticed, I spent my entire career on the cybersecurity space, and I remember that when I started, it was very difficult to find information. So one of the main advantages an hacker could have, 15 years ago or 20 years ago, was having access to some information and use that information to perform an attack. And from one side, finding information from an hacker perspective was complicated, but on the other side, perform an attack was not that complicated. Actually, it was the opposite. Was pretty easy from the technical perspective. So right now the technology had a big evolution. So we are in a much better space. But some of the things that I still notice in what I'm doing is that there is a big needs, because we saw that is very important on cybersecurity to share information and to collaborate to share information. So I'm curious, Suzanne, to know if in specific on this report or in general, you have an opinion about how we can do a better job, right, and collaborate between government, institution, companies, what we can do there in order to improve this topic.
Yeah, it's such an important question and important issue, and it's one that the Commission actually spent a lot of time on. I should note that the members of the Commission included 4 members of Congress from both sides of the aisle and from both sides of the Capitol. So we had 2 from the Senate, 2 from the House, completely bipartisan. Then there were 6 of us who were outside of government, and it included Tom Fanning, who is the CEO of Southern Company, who did a great job bringing the private sector perspective to the Commission, which was so important. And then the senior folks at the key departments and agencies currently in government, which was a unique thing for me. And I've been involved with lots of commissions, and I've never been on one where current, department leadership was sitting on the Commission. And that gave us also a very interesting perspective. So we had a strong bias on the Commission toward trying to rely on the market to improve cybersecurity and drive better cyber practices. And we understand, of course, that the market has failed so far. It hasn't really done what we would like it to do. And so we looked at why. Why is that? And what are the things that make a market more efficient? And one of the most important things is exactly what you've cited, which is information. It's hard for a market to drive behavior if the folks acting in the market don't have access to information that helps them do that risk analysis, that risk management, and make those risk decisions and purchasing and supplying decisions. So we have a number of recommendations in the Commission that try to provide that information. One of the most important is the Bureau of Cyber Statistics that we recommend. We recommend that the government create this bureau like the Bureau of Labor Statistics, which has, puts out all kinds of useful information that, again, helps folks understand where the market is with respect to labor, for example. So this would be a bureau that would gather data from lots of different ways. It would be authorized to purchase aggregate data on cyber incidents, on the costs of those incidents, et cetera. But it would also be able to get information voluntarily provided. And in some instances where companies are aggregators already of this kind of information, we recommended that Congress the government consider requiring that they report on a regular basis, maybe quarterly, maybe annually, aggregated, anonymized data. And then this bureau could analyze that data and provide useful reports to the public that could be used, for example, by a CISO who wants to make an argument about return on investment. One of the hardest things today for CISOs and CIOs to do, right?
Yeah, I absolutely. And I'm also curious to know what Chris think about that. But in specific on the last topic that you mentioned, I think putting together information can enhance our level in general on cybersecurity from different perspectives. There is, of course, a technical knowledge that by now different way that an attacker, can use to penetrate or steal information from an organization, private or public, is very useful. But also, in the day by day, I interact with, I'm sure that we'll have many CISO listening us right now, or CIO, that sometimes they struggle to say how I can really justify the investment on cybersecurity. As we know, cybersecurity is always a mitigation of risk. It's 100% security doesn't exist. And it's always a balance about how much I can invest compared to the risk. And I think just also on this one can help organization to drive better their strategy. So I think is super important. Chris, what do you think about this topic?
Yeah, I totally agree. I've seen organizations struggle for years with trying to prove or even measure ROI on security. And often I sort of like to describe it as an airbag analogy in your car. Your last car, how much did you pay for that? Nobody really knows. Was it 400? Was it 900 or 1800? You don't measure it because you don't know how much it's worth until the day that you actually need it. And then it's worth the world.
Oh, yeah.
So it's very complicated to measure it until you really know if you need it and how bad it's going to be when you do.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Chris. And I think one of the ways that we do this in other contexts, this risk analysis, we are helped by the insurance market. Insurance can play a key role in making markets more efficient and driving good risk management and good risk behavior. But in cyber, the insurance market really hasn't been doing that, hasn't been able to do that. Despite the fact that they're selling products, our assessment was that that is not actually driving better risk behavior by the folks who are purchasing the insurance. And we decided a number of reasons for that. One is certainly, I think, a lack of trained cyber claim adjusters and underwriters, right? Folks who really know how to do this. And so we have recommendations for training and certification in that regard. But this issue of data is a huge issue in that arena as well. They really don't know how to price the risk, how to assess the risk. And that gets to this same issue. So we've got recommendations for bringing the private sector together with the government at our National Risk Modeling Center of Excellence, which is at DHS in the Cyber Security and Infrastructure Security Agency, the National Risk Management Center. Bring together to talk some more about how to get the data, and I have some experience with that from my days at DHS, and also then how to model the risk.
So, Susan, I think on this topic, and I find very interesting the analogy that Chris made. So I think, by being part of cybersecurity for many years, all of us know that the majority of the company, if they had an incident, tend to, try to keep as much as possible that information. So, and try to, sometimes don't share. So do you think that in order to have, part of our day by day, like, at some point, some measurement, on the cybersecurity side, like the analogy that Chris made became like the normality, that became like the normal. So do you think that we should introduce like sort of an enforcement from the law perspective and actually ask not to volunteer share information from some organization, but ask them to do that by law and to basically put an obligation? Or do you think that just simply by keep talking about that is something that we can achieve even without adding any obligation?
Well, the commission actually recommended the adoption of a breach notification law at the national level, much like the legislation that's been adopted in 50 states, but 50, right, with lots of different versions. Let's have a national standard for that. That really relates to the theft of personally identifiable information, sensitive personal information. But we also go farther and suggest that Congress ought to look at whether there ought to be some mandatory requirements for cyber incident reporting, and we think with regard to particularly critical infrastructure, and we recommend that through a functional analysis that we establish a subset of critical infrastructure that's called systemically important critical infrastructure. The unfortunate acronym was pronounced SICI, which I think is, we're going to have to come up with something I think that sounds better than that. But the idea is that, you know, at DHS, they're now, I keep lapsing into we, but it's been almost 3 years now since I left. But they have continued this work on looking not just at systems and assets, but on functions that we rely upon in our economy for critical government missions, you know, essential functions. And then what are the ways in which those functions could be disrupted? And go back to those assets that need to be systems and networks that need to be shored up to be able to preserve those functions. And it might be that you're not going to be able to protect them. And as you said, there's no 100% security. So we have to look at not just deterring the threat and fixing vulnerabilities, but on mitigating the consequences, right? Look at what are those, what happens if you have these kinds of disruptions in these functions, and how can you make those consequences less impactful, if you will? How do you mitigate those consequences? And that might have nothing to do with cyber technology. Think paper ballots, right? If you think about paper ballots are a analog solution to a cyber vulnerability, or really a vulnerability in public trust.
Yeah, no, 100%. And before I keep going, I want to, you know, remind everyone that is listening us, please feel free to ask any question. We will be, you know, happy to, you know, go down and answer to any question in specific. So actually, I see there is one question, and the question is for both of you, I think, Susan and Chris. And the question is, how is the COVID-19 pandemic testing the risk cost benefit analysis? Do you think it's changing the balance? Is introducing opportunity to, you know, increase our level of cybersecurity? What's your perspective?
Yeah, it clearly is increasing the attack surface very significantly, right? As we're all meeting in this now in this virtual world, we're all working from home. Many people on personal devices using new technology that they're not familiar with. I mean, the attack surface is huge, and it will continue, I think, to grow as Chris and I were talking earlier about the fact that we're going to see industries moving toward more automation, as both as a way of increasing social distancing, but also to deal with a diminished workforce that is being forced to shelter in place, or that may be impacted by the virus. And as we go more and more toward that automation and networked industrial Internet of Things, we again further increase the attack surface. So from that standpoint, it provides a very tempting target to malicious actors. And I don't think the incentive that malicious actors have had for cyber activity has diminished in any way. So if you look at the things that drive the key actors we worry about, nation state actors, Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, and you look at what has motivated their cyber activity, those motivations, if anything, are increased by this. I mean, if you think China, at bottom, I always say that these countries their leadership's #1 goal is to stay in power. And so then you think about, okay, what do they think they need to do to stay in power, and how will they use cyber to do that? We know in China, it's about growing the economy and controlling information in order to control their population. So 100%. Taking an economic hit just like we are. Their need for economic espionage has not diminished. If anything, it has increased. Their drive to be the first and best in the development of AI, for example, has only increased, I suspect. And so the espionage activity that we see around those objectives, we should expect to see increase. And in fact, Google came out with a report just in the last couple of days where they are seeing an increase in government-backed activity from at least 12 different countries. So I think the incentives are very much still there. Russia still is struggling economically, and Russia, I think, may be tempted to further, it's what we might refer to as adventurist activities. It's expansionist activities. It's interference in countries in its region, as well as its efforts to try to drive a wedge between us and NATO and weaken the EU. And we see that in information operations around COVID-19, right? And I think, I think we should anticipate that they will think we are so distracted that they can do things they couldn't otherwise do, and that we might see more activity from them. Same with Iran, and North Korea continues to need money, so they'll continue to use cyber to steal money.
Oh yeah, well, I agree 100%. And I think even from our angle, we are seeing in some of the customers that we support an increasing of attack and activities from that perspective. And so absolutely, I think is happening. Also on the threat intelligence that we were discussing with Chris in one of the other webinar, you can also, is there downloadable. You can see that, some of the information that we put together are basically indicating that there is a growing type of activities going on related to, sometimes using well-known attacks, but everything's behind what is happening on COVID-19. And these entire things that we have a top priority that is our, of course, health and preserve our society because of what's happening. I think hide an attack behind the COVID-19 is giving them lots of more possibilities. And in particular, staying on this topic, I grew up working on a SOC of a big oil and gas company. I was leading a team in this security operations center. And of course, one of the biggest policy that we created, and one of the things that we spent a lot of time to monitor was, make sure that there was a segregation in many occasions. If it was not possible, we're deeply monitoring the connections on critical infrastructure, and it was really a big exception to have remote worker accessing to a rigs in the middle of the ocean or on a pipeline, bringing gas from North Africa to Europe, for example. There was a very strict policy for getting that access. I'm talking now with the same company, but, we're talking with different company. They moved to have that as an exception to a standard. They are, they need now that to keep operating and to, keep, making our critical infrastructure working. So that landscape is completely different. What's your
conversations all the talks that we've had over the last few years about the future of work, right? We've known this move toward automation is coming. I think it's going to be accelerated, and so those conversations need to be picked back up. We need to be talking about that.
I agree 100%. COVID-19 is accelerating process that was already ongoing. What's perspective, Chris?
Yeah, I was going to say there's actually even one more perspective. We always picture like the critical operations or the critical data as living behind like these concrete walls and firewalls and all this security. And the problem that we're dealing with now is opening up holes in that security. But there's another piece happening, which is when they take those operations and make them happen outside of that building, that data now also lives outside of that building. And all of that investment that we had before no longer protects that data like it did before. Now we need to start protecting data out in people's homes or in these remote offices or places like that where it never existed before. So this actually opens up a whole new realm of possibilities to those nation state actors that look to harvest information. For example, around the election time, we know that a lot of open source databases that the states put up with voter information, we saw botnets hitting those and just drinking out of those and pulling data off to overseas locations. And now this, having all this information everywhere just sort of gives them a much easier target to attack than these more structured, secured buildings that used to house the data.
Oh yeah, 100%. I agree, and I think, and I'm curious to know your opinion, Suzanne. I think this landscape that we just described is potentially changing also the geopolitical situation, or can have an impact. I'm curious to know your perspective there. Do you think that is happening, or can leverage on the entire world situation?
Yeah, well, as I said, I think that certainly from a nation state perspective, uh, we should expect that they're going to at least continue at the same level, if not increase their
Yeah.
use of cyber, both for espionage purposes and gathering information. But I think again, we need to be prepared for also disruptive.
Oh yeah.
And my view on the potential biggest worry for attacks on industrial control systems has been less that an adversary nation like Russia, for example, would suddenly out of the blue take down a significant segment of the electric grid, than that they would demonstrate their capability to do just that. And I think that's a big part of what the attacks in Ukraine in 2015 on their electric grid were, as much as anything, about signaling to us. And so, particularly if they think this is a time when they could, for example, step up their activity in Ukraine or other places in Eastern and Central Europe, they would have to contemplate that we might take some action in response. And the worry is, what I've always worried about is that in demonstrating their capability to affect our critical infrastructure, it's like a gun to our head.
Yeah.
It can be used to deter us from then taking the action we would normally take in response to their bad behavior. And so I do think that we all need to have our gates up. And as much as the challenge has been increased by all the things that Chris has talked about, the massive attack surface and the increase, the ability to hide in the noise of criminal activity. IBM X-Force Research Division came out with information that efforts to use the virus to trick people into downloading malware and providing an opening to infect their phones and computers increased by 14,000% over 2 weeks. Yeah. So the ability for a nation state to hide in that, much of that noise is probably criminal, is significant.
Yeah, no, 100%.
I have a question from, if this is a good time, we have a question from the audience, if you guys would like to.
Yeah, please, Chris. That'd be great.
Wonderful. So in thinking about cyber monitoring and defense as a team sport, how can we better accelerate and leverage public-private partnerships in the COVID era? I think that's probably directed towards you, Suzanne.
Well, I can start. I'm sure Andrea has some thoughts on that as well. Yeah. I'll refer back again to the commission report, and I should put in a direct plug for folks to take a look at the report and read it. It's, as I said, there are over 80 recommendations. It's very meaty, but it's very readable. We worked hard to make it readable, and you can find it at solarium.gov. But we had a whole pillar. I said we had 6 pillars around which we organized our efforts. There's one on operationalizing the relationship between the private sector and the government. And again, one of the key features there is even as we continue to provide particularly risk management assistance to businesses of all sizes and state, local, territorial, and tribal governments, that we do recognize that there is a subset of assets that's particularly important. And there we can really pilot, as much as anything, a deeper relationship, collaborative, operational relationship between the government and the private sector. So we move beyond just information sharing, which we've talked about, for decades, and we move into insight sharing and development and collaborative development of knowledge. So when I was at DHS, for example, we had a pilot project where we had, in one sector, we had a handful of cleared individuals who would come in and read early intelligence products and give us insights. What did they see in this? Here's what we see in the intelligence that we're seeing. What do you see? And then most importantly, what do you think is most important for your colleagues throughout this sector and throughout industry? What information in here is most actionable? What do they need to know in order to take action to defend their networks? And then we could go back to the intelligence community and say, look, this is the part that needs to be declassified. We need to get this out more broadly. So we've made a recommendation for a joint collaborative environment in which data from the private sector through appropriate mechanisms and the government would be pooled for shared knowledge and shared insights, as opposed to simply blindly passing information back and forth. Just as one example.
Yeah, no, and I agree 100%. And that would be the key. And I think everyone have to participate on that, on these information sharing, vendor, private, public. I see tremendous power that we have around, that sharing things. So I strongly believe that can increase the cybersecurity level. Absolutely. So I see there is a lots of questions coming. Chris, did you see any other question interesting coming?
Absolutely. So we have a state government official that would like to ask what states can do to help combat the disruptive information. Maybe that's like disinformation, I guess, or yeah.
Let's open up another chapter.
Yeah, terrific. Well, I'm really pleased with the question. Information operations, disinformation is something I've been working on for the last 3 years since getting out of government. It was clearly a big concern of ours when I was at DHS in 2016 as we looked to secure our election infrastructure, and the activity, particularly that Chris referenced, the activity around voter registration databases. We understood that our job was both to protect the cyber security of our elections, but also to preserve public trust in the integrity of those elections. And the activity around voter registration databases, we concluded, was really probably most importantly part of an information operation, right? The idea was that if you could get in and alter the data in voter registration databases, delete names, change the spelling of names, change addresses, as people showed up to vote on election day, their names would not be on the rolls, or they wouldn't match their ID, and they'd be turned away, or long lines, lots of confusion, and it would have the potential to undermine the public's confidence in the integrity of the election. And then, of course, the hacking and leaking of emails. And we have the Senate report that came out yesterday confirming the intelligence community's assessment that this was Russia's effort to influence the outcome of the election. But what we also understood was that this activity by Russia was actually part of a long-term, broader campaign to undermine democracy and democratic institutions much more broadly than just elections. And so I've been working at CSIS to look at the ways in which information operations are being used to undermine democratic institutions, and particularly I have focused on the courts. We have seen a Russian propaganda campaign to undermine public confidence in the integrity of our courts, in their independence and their impartiality. And so I've been working with judges and state courts, state justices and judges all across the country, as well as federal judges, to try to help them identify and address disinformation. What we have determined, and this is applicable to states, local governments, and to businesses, which increasingly are being targeted with information operations to undermine the public's trust in them as well, is that you need to work with the platforms. You need to detect. You need to have trained folks who can detect, and the technology to detect these incidents early. You need to have a plan in place right now for how you're going to communicate with the public, what kinds of situations you should be able to anticipate. For the courts, we develop some key narratives we see in the disinformation. But at the end of the day, with all those things that you can do, what we really need to do is to build public resilience. We really need, and it's not just media literacy. If the target is to undermine the public's trust in democracy, we need to help the public be strong against those messages. That means a renewal of civic education and civic engagement. I'm now working hard to convene a strategic dialogue on civics and civic engagement as a national security imperative. We have to renew our sense of shared values, why democracy is important, why it's worth fighting for, and that we have to fight for it, that it's under attack, and what our institutions are about, and how we as individuals need to hold them all accountable.
Mhm.
I think is a fantastic message to conclude that I deeply agree. I think one of the solutions start exactly from there. Absolutely. So just before close this great session, Suzanne, I think there was just a very last question, pretty practical, but I thought was very interesting. Is we discussed about sharing information. We discussed about some of the solutions. So some of the people ask, okay, I agree with that, and I think it's fantastic. What I have to start if I want to consume that information and start to share information. So if I'm a private or a company, what I should do in order to be part of this program?
Great. So there are a few things I would point you to that exist right now. You certainly should you should sign up with the Department of Homeland Security through CISA, CISA.gov. You should be getting their alerts and their bulletins. They have a database of critical vulnerabilities and mitigation recommendations for those, patches, etc. So you should make sure that you're getting those, accessing those free resources. There's something called automated information sharing through the same organization, CISA, CISA.gov, where companies can sign up to receive automatic threat intelligence information that can be immediately plugged into your whatever kinds of perimeter defense that you've got set up. There's a private sector effort called the Cyber Threat Alliance, which is a number of private sector companies that have come together who decided early on that they were no longer going to compete on who had the best or most cyber threat intelligence. They were going to pool their cyber threat indicators, their cyber threat intelligence, and compete on what they could do with that, what products and services they could provide to their customers. They recognized the importance of having this large, very large database of cyber threat intelligence, and companies that develop cyber threat indicators can join the Cyber Threat Alliance. So those are three very practical, right off the top, things that people can do.
That's fantastic, and that was a great discussion and great chatting with you guys today. So I wish you a great day and talk to you soon.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
And Suzanne, thank you.
Thank you so much.